Advanced Marketplace welcomes you to this webinar series highlighting the importance of having a configuration management system, CMDB. This series will demonstrate areas to leverage a CMDB and gain valuable insight while supporting numerous IT functions into your organization. During this webinar series, we will feature HP software products to illustrate the value of these concepts. But similar successes can be achieved through the integration of numerous tools available today. There are 4 sections to this series, and the following topics will be covered. Application mapping in a CMDB. Utilizing CMDB for change and release control. How a CMDB supports efficient business service management, runtime service model. Improve application performance and quality with a CMDB. Application lifecycle management. This is the second presentation in a 4-part series covering utilizing CMDB for change and release control.
Hi, my name is John Stagman, and today we're going to talk about change management, and specifically we're going to talk about change in the HP release control application that helps improve your processes and methods for assessing and monitoring changes and planning change. And I'm with Advanced Marketplace, and we are a consultancy based in Tampa, Florida. We were incorporated in 1996 and now have technical consultants nationwide. From 2008 to 2012, we were on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list, and we are one of the top 5 fastest growing technology small businesses in Florida. And our expertise includes application lifecycle management, IT operations, security, training and support, and we provide both end-to-end process development and process consulting through technical tool implementation and support services. So today we're going to talk about change, and I like this quote from IDC. Over 80% of business critical service disruptions can be attributed to poor change control processes, including flawed change impact assessment. So a lot of what causes disruptions are a failure to accurately assess and understand the impact of a particular change as changes are executed. So what are some of the challenges to effective review of changes? Well, how do we determine actual impact and risk? Are we sure we're reviewing all changes? And do we have a good way to notice if there are collisions between changes scheduled at the same time? Or collisions with a change occurring at a point when there's a business process reason that that change shouldn't happen? When should we schedule deployment to minimize risk? And do we have a way to both identify risk and identify conflicts with times where we've said changes shouldn't happen? There's also an element that when we go to execute a change, do we have ready visibility to when other changes are scheduled? And not just any changes, but changes potentially affecting or impacting the same configuration items and systems that my change touches. So do we have a way to find those quickly and easily? Are there potential conflicts with my change? So are other changes modifying those items so that they could have an impact on my changes? And what's the implementation status of those other change activities? So a change that maybe was scheduled to be done before my change started, if it's running late or it has to be backed out, so it hasn't been closed as complete, maybe I need to confirm what's going on before I can start my change, because it might prevent my change from being completed. So historically, when we review change, I have a picture of the normal change meeting, and it's a whole lot of people sitting around a big table in a room. And they all have a big stack of paper because they printed out every single change for every single person. I was at a customer, and they literally had 70 people around a table with 160-page change reports, and they went through every single change. And one of the challenges is that understanding of system architecture and relationships is very often limited to the knowledge of the people who opened the change, and they have to be there at the change meeting, and the other people at the change meeting. But what if Joe's out of town, it's his change, or he manages that application, and somebody else from his team is representing his group, and they may be able to say, well, here are the changes we're responsible for. But if the right person isn't there, they're the one that knows, then that information isn't accessible to the captain. Conflict identification is haphazard. It's unpredictable, it usually relies on a review where you go to each change and you say, so does anyone have any questions or concerns about this change? And hopefully there's somebody in the room that can ask the right question. But a lot of times, you're trying to get through 110 changes and you want to do it in 60 minutes. And so it's challenging to identify conflicts. And it can be difficult to recognize the different dimensions in which a conflict can occur. So not just, we're both modifying the same CI, but other issues. It can be very hard to identify potential impacts of a change and identify appropriate review based on that. So a really simple example is we need to recycle this virtual machine. So we're going to take it down at this time, and it's going to be down for 10 minutes, and then everything's going to be back up. Well, hooray, sounds simple. But the problem is what if it's the last week of the month and that virtual machine supports a component or an application that's necessary to drive end-of-month financial reporting? So if you were doing this change on the 15th, you'd be fine. But you're trying to do it on the 27th. And that could adversely impact financial end-of-month reporting. So, and that someone would have to know that. So ideally, your system can flag for you that this application, which supports end-of-month financial reporting, is hosted by this virtual machine. And by the way, end-of-month financial reporting applications have a change blackout window for the last 8 days of every month. So that there'd be a way for you to see that you, because of an impact on this service, have a potential violation of a time period rule. And that doesn't mean your change can't happen. It means that you now know to look very closely to see if we restart this VM at this time, will it adversely impact financial reporting? And if it will, maybe you need to reschedule. And where we really run into these types of issues, is when you've got a great shop, you've been doing everything in your campus, and you know what's going on, and suddenly you merge with that other company or that other part of your organization. Now you have 2 data centers, 2 totally different sets of people, and you're integrating systems, and not everyone knows what's everything in each data center and how things all fit together. So as your organization grows or expands and as technical complexity increases, all the issues with assessment and understanding become magnified. So HP's solution is comprehensive to mitigate risk, streamline your process, and it integrates data across your system, and it can even automate task execution once a change is approved. So we do that by leveraging UCMDB and dynamic discovery, HP Service Manager, HP Release Control, and optionally, we mentioned HP Automation. So how does this come together? Well, to enable release control, we integrate with UCMDB. And UCMDB tells us through discovery our configuration items, their attributes. It allows us to validate after a change occurs, is the actual discovered state of that CI what it's supposed to be after we make a modification. It includes business components, so applications, business services, and not just business services, but also business function alignment. So we talk a lot about business services. So you may, if you were a retailer perhaps, you may have a business service of pricing management, markdown management, and inventory control. Those may be some of your major business services to support your field organization. But you might also have an element where you want to be able to say, well, I want to break those reportings down to business functions. So you may have a business function of store systems, Or maybe a business function of labor management. So some of the services that impact stores go under store systems for a business function, but not under labor management. So you may have a number of things where that extra layer of business function comes into play. So we also bring that over to release control. So it's possible to view things in related to the functions that they support. And most importantly, we bring over UCMDB's rich relationship information that tells us how a particular CI both directly and indirectly is related both upstream and downstream to other configuration items and business components throughout the CMDB, so that all that information can be leveraged and analyzed by the release control engine. Now on the service manager side, we're bringing over both changes and change tasks into release control. So if you do change where you schedule individual tasks to modify CIs, each one of those will appear as a distinct item in release control and can be assessed. The other thing that happens very much for Service Manager is we also expose the release control information within the Service Manager processes so that you don't have to go look at release control to see what release control information is available. It's available in interactions, incidents, problems, and changes as part of every transactional record. So what does release control do overall? It gives us a single view of all changes. It gives us an authoritative view. You can consolidate change requests from multiple service desk systems and multiple change systems. So why would you want to do that? Well, you might put a lot of your changes in Service Manager, but you may also use a tool for code distribution for your custom in-house applications, where because that's the tool that manages you check in, you check out your code, you develop it there, you test it against that system, and it's the code system that you use to distribute your code, that it has a workflow and it does its own approvals, and you've decided that the system of record for application changes is done in that environment, not in Service Manager. Well, you can integrate release control with that change system as well, so that you get a combined view of all changes in release control on a single change calendar. Release control automates impact analysis with user configurable methods, so you can define what the elements of impact are for your organization. It objectively determines risk. So instead of a little drop down where somebody says, I think it's low risk or medium risk, and you're not really sure why they're picking it, you can define criteria that release control uses to assess and determine risk. It automates collision detection. Are we modifying the same CI? Are we impacting the same service at the same time with multiple changes? Are the same people scheduled to execute changes at the same time? So collision detection can move beyond just, is it happening to the same CI? It gives us our forward schedule of change for planning and visibility to all changes scheduled. And it allows us to drive a virtual change approval board for efficiency. So you don't need to have 70 people around a room every week for potentially a few hours running through all of your changes. So the best way to understand release control, though, is to move into a demo. So at this point, we're going to move to a live system, and we're going to walk through a demonstration of release control. And we're going to start with the view from Service Manager, because a lot of people have access to Service Manager, your change user, your change technician. So as I log into Service Manager now, and we're waiting for that login to complete, we now go into the to-do queue, and when we log in, let's start first with what's in Service Manager related to release control. Now, Service Manager, we have changes, and we're going to go look at a change. And one of the big things that happened with version 9.20 and higher is that we've embedded the release control capability within the Service Manager application. So for a lot of Service Manager users, we've now given them an ability to do something that was previously difficult to access, which are some of the more sophisticated tools in change assessment. So if I look at an existing change, let's look at what it means to expose release control capabilities. So I have a change here that I'm opening now. And if I look at this change, I can see that it's for the online banking service, that it's affected, we're modifying OBA Web 1 is my configuration item. And historically, if I went into the change meeting, and if I go up above, I can look and see that my scheduled implementation start is the 12th, and I'm running through the 14th. And when I went into the change meeting traditionally for this week, I might have all this information available, and I'd rely on people to tell me, well, what else is happening at the same time, and what else is possibly going to happen next. One of the big things that we get with release control is we get two elements. One, we get an embedded change calendar view on my change ticket. And that embedded calendar view is a very specialized view of the change calendar. It doesn't show me every single change. It shows me those changes which affect the same services and CIs as my change is modifying. So I see those changes with which I am most likely to have a conflict. So I can see, so here's my change, and if I put my cursor over, I can see my change number, what my planned start is. I can see that it's assigned to Rob. I can also see that I have some time period conflicts, so I'm breaking some time period rules. So if I was not breaking time period rules, time period conflicts would not be listed. And I can look at this other related change, install new application with updated code, and I can get a quick view of that. But also notice at the bottom that I also see some details about that change. So I don't have to actually go look at that other change to get a good idea what it's about. And I can look at this one, and I can say, you know, can I really do this change at this time, given these other changes? So it gives me a real quick view of the calendar. But there's another element of release control called change assessment. And what change assessment provides, as it loads, is what we're talking about, the system leveraging information from CMDB and your change system to identify your change impact effectively, collisions between changes. So what do we mean by impact? Well, because we're modifying certain CIs and you selected certain services, we can say, because we're modifying OBA Web 1, which is the CI we selected in this change, we potentially impact multiple CIs that are defined in the CMDB. So we see that we may directly affect the online banking service, and that we may directly affect the online banking application, and indirectly affect the SharePoint service. And that indirect effect means that while we're not modifying something it directly relies on, there is a connection there. And we can see this being affected by this web server. When I click on online banking, I can see that this CI, because it affects online banking and checking account services, that's why we may impact the business function of financial services. So it provides us with a significant view of impact that we don't normally have. We also can look at particular attributes that are being changed. So if we're changing the name of the application, and we can do other comparisons to models. The next element, though, is what are the collisions that may occur because of this change? And so what this does is it says that this change, because of when it's scheduled and the impacted services and CIs associated with it, there's a potential conflict between my change and these changes. And I can look at that in a list view, but sometimes it's more helpful, if I click here, I can see a Gantt view. And what a Gantt view provides me with is I can see very clearly if I click on each one, I can see that there's a conflict here because I have a collision between the different business CIs, services, and applications that are potentially impacted, and some system CIs. So I'm actually modifying this server, and we have attributes that say that that's impacting 4 columns. And I can look at this next item, and it'll show me that I'm modifying business CIs and system CIs. When I get down to the bottom, I'm modifying some business CIs, and I'm also having the same implementer. So it's not just technology issues that we can set up for what is a collision. You can also say, well, we have a collision because the same implementer is assigned at the same time. Now notice, we're not saying this change can't happen, because one of the reasons I'm seeing collisions is in this particular change system, I have changes scheduled for a week at a time. So they may have multiple tasks underneath it. And so it may be that at this time I can still move forward, but because there is a potential collision, it means that this change may require more stringent review and assessment. So it lets me very easily see, I have some conflicts here. What's the urgency of that? What's the impact? I can also look to see if my change breaks any time period rules. And you can have blackout periods and change windows. So in this case, there's a window for SharePoint downtime. There is a window for blackout periods. So notice that means that downtime and change windows can also be filtered. So they only apply to you if you need to set up specific windows per service. Release control allows you to do that. But this lets me see that my change window, which is shown in black, falls outside our change blackout, falls within our change blackout period. So we're overlapping the change blackout window. It also is outside the permissible change downtime period for SharePoint. That may not matter to us. We're modifying online, and if we're not going to cause downtime for SharePoint, then there's not an impact here. We also are able to assess risk. And the nice thing about risk is there's 2 elements of it. There's potential damage, which means the degree of damage that you may cause if your CI fails. And there's probability of failure, which means the likelihood that we could have this change fail. And these assessments can both be configured on the factors that matter to your organization and business. Now here we're saying, because we have time period conflicts with scheduled time intervals, so if we had configured an online banking change window and we were doing this change outside of that window, then we have potential damage to that service, and so that could be factored in. How many CIs we're modifying also determines the weight of damage. So if you have a large-scale change modifying multiple CIs, the possible damage if your change fails may be ranked higher. On the probability of failure, do we have collisions? How many? What's the weight of those? So do we have directly impacted things because of the CIs that we're modifying, we directly impact certain services which could cause a failure? Or how many CIs, again, are being modified? What's the planned duration? So we may say that a change that is scheduled for 2 hours interval has a different risk than a change that takes place over 2 days. An estimated risk from the end user, so if we allow them to assess medium, high, low, that can be factored in. Additionally, if an outage exists for the change, that can be factored in. So the risk information is configurable. Then we also have an ability to say, have we done similar changes in the past, and have they been successful? And in this case, we have a number of changes that were successful historically. The 2 that are not reviewed, those haven't been completed yet. In fact, they're not even, so they don't have started and end times because they haven't been performed. So the nice thing about this is we can see, every time we do a change like this, we're seeing a fairly high failure rate. So let's look at if we're doing everything that we need to. So it gives us an ability to look not just at this one change, but assess how it interacts with other changes that we've done in the past and in the environment. And to do that previously, when you were looking at a change, that was difficult. You had to just go search for changes. You had to work to find the information, and it was difficult. And it now exposes that right within the change record in the exposed change calendar and the change assessment section. I can also look to see, whatever time period I would like to see when this change may have occurred. So that's one place that we've embedded change release control functionality in Service Manager. There are other areas. So we also embedded in incident management, in service desk interactions, and in problem management. And to demonstrate that, I'm just going to go open a new incident. So one of the challenges that we often have when we open a new incident and somebody calls and says, "Oh, online banking, I'm having a problem," is that it's sometimes hard for the service desk or your monitoring network operations group to say, I typed brand. So let me try this again, B-A-N-K. So if I bring online banking in, once I have a CI specified, my change calendar can load. And what this does is similar to change. It's not going to show me the entire change calendar. It's going to immediately look and show me those changes that specifically relate to the service and CI that I've entered. So I get a filtered view of changes. So I can say, it just happens to be, I'm opening a ticket for online banking, and if I open my calendar and say, okay, so it's 2058 and 714. Well, I can look down here and say, current day. I could look at the week, but now look, why I have a current change scheduled for today, and it's scheduled from 8:30 to 10:30. Is there an outage scheduled? And so I don't have to go look at that change. I can go right down here and say, and the outage is from 8:30 to 10:30, and we're updating the online bank web servers. So there is a scheduled outage. I can say, online banking. And I know right away that I have an outage for online banking that is scheduled at the time I'm opening this incident. The same allows me to say, though, have I had a change? Let's say I didn't have a change right now, and someone reported an issue. Well, I can also very easily look forward and backward to see if I'd had related changes in the near history. So it allows me to see, and this is true, remember, in incident, in problem, and in interactions. It allows me to very quickly assess. Someone's calling about something. Could this be related to a change that was done today, yesterday, last week? Is there a change scheduled right now or in the immediate future that addresses it? And it brings me that information automatically in a filtered way. So I didn't have to go search the changes. And it brings it to me intelligently so that if I add a CI here, so when I I get the related CIs for online banking. And if I select a particular CI, then I'll also get an assessment based on the CI and the service. Now in this case, those are the same, but it's possible that you would have a CI that supports multiple services. So maybe if I had been modifying a CI that supported both online banking and another service, and the change was for another service, I would see that because I'd put in the CI. So that's kind of how we've layered release control in from the user view in Service Manager. So when I'm logging interactions, trying to solve an incident, resolving problems, and working changes, it's exposed. Now, if I want to look at the complete change calendar, I can also launch that directly from within Service Manager. And as the change calendar loads, it'll come up eventually. So now I have my change calendar view, and I'm going to go back a little bit because I have sample data that's in here from November, December. And if I click here, I now get some sample changes for this week. And as I look at those changes, I can see everything scheduled for that interval. And I can also start with a month view. And the month view just shows me the number of changes on each day. And the reason it does that is that when you think of a month view, if you do a large number of changes, so if you were doing 20 to 30 changes on a given day, trying to show all of those changes in the calendar month view really becomes unworkable. So what I can do is I can click on a day, and it'll take me directly to that day's list of changes. I can also say week. It'll give me everything for the week and month. If I want to, I can also just say, oh, just show me a big list of all the changes. And it'll sort them by change number. Now, I'm going to go back to my calendar view. So if I want to look at the changes for a particular week, I can do that. And then as I look, I get some very specific information about each change. So in my change calendar view, I can see all the changes. I can see their start time. Put my cursor over to see, what's the risk, collision severity, implementer, plan start and end, and whether there's some time period conflicts. And as I walk through each of these changes, I can see specific information about that change directly in the release control calendar view without having to go find that change in Service Manager. You can configure what information is displayed in release control. So if there's additional custom fields, you can add those and configure the integration to display them. I can see if there's related records. I can see the assessment information that we walked through previously, so what CIs are impacted, what collisions occur with this change. Are there time period conflicts? Which ones? And you can see that our black bar, which marks our change, is going across a large area with time period conflicts. What's the risk? So on and so forth. So I can look at that for each change. And if I go back out to my list view, one of the things I like to explain here is notice that only some of my changes have collisions, and some are more severe than others. And what this allows you to start to do is say, well, if a change is low risk and has no collisions and no time period conflicts, for example, you might set a standard that that change requires review on demand at your change meeting. So if someone has a question, we'll discuss it. Or you might say we'll run through those quickly. But anything that has a medium or high or any defined collision will be reviewed in detail. Or anything that's evaluated with high risk. And it looks like most of my sample changes are low risk. But I can look and then triage where we focus our attention in the change meeting. So this is the change calendar in Service Manager. So you have your users having access within Service Manager. There's also a direct access to the change calendar in the release control application. And you'll notice it looks exactly the same. And that's because the view that's embedded in Service Manager is release control. And they merge that view within the Service Manager client. So now if I'm in release control, I can show you a little bit more about how we can configure and manage the impacts and risk and assessment. So if I look at my module menu and I look at the administration, it's in the administration area that I can say, what are my process rules? So how do we determine what impacts matter? How do we determine what a collision is and how we determine what collisions determine what risk level for that change? What are the factors that we use to assess risk? So an example is planned outage. So if there is a planned outage, Our score for risk is 10. If the planned duration is equal or greater than 1 hour, 2, equal greater than 24 hours, 8. And these are all configurable within your organization. And the same for the damage element of risk. So, is it an emergency change? Are there time period conflicts detected by the system? Do we therefore increase the risk? How do I define time periods? Well, I can define change blackout windows, SharePoint change windows. I can define a query that says, when does SharePoint downtime apply? So it only applies to SharePoint changes. And if I have a risk score that relies on that, it'll only adjust the risk if this is violated for a change meeting that filter. So all the criteria that are used to assess changes and determine risk are configurable in release control. So that gives you an initial overview of release control and the embedded capabilities within Service Manager. Now, release control can do more than this. You can actually integrate release control with multiple change systems. So if you manage one facet of change in Service Manager, but you use a code distribution system to manage some other changes in another tool, you can integrate release control with both of those tools to get a common consolidated view of change across the organization. It's optionally possible to have release control enable approvals to be performed from release control and passed back to the other products, so that rather than having a user log into both your change system for application code and Service Manager, you might say, we want these users to go directly to release control and do their approvals from one centralized location. Release control can also show you changes scheduled through HP automation systems and display those automatically as well. It's possible for it to propose suggested implementation times based on when other changes are occurring, and risk scores and suggested implementation times can be automatically passed back to Service Manager. So now I want to go back and review some of what we've talked about with release control's capabilities. So you can get a single view of all changes in your organization. You can tie together changes from multiple service desk applications and systems. You automate impact analysis so that your impact assessment is based on a systematized, reproducible set of criteria. You're leveraging the information from the CMDB that tells you the characteristics of a CI and its interactions with other elements of your infrastructure to determine impact systematically and reproducibly. We're objectively defining risk and applying it consistently. So you can, and that can be configured to meet your organization's unique requirements. We're detecting collisions at multiple levels. Not only are you modifying the same CI, but are you modifying a CI that impacts the system at the same time that we are potentially impacting that service or system with another change. So it's not just one level deep. We provide an extensive forward schedule of change for planning that gives you a lot of ways to group and view the information to make it more usable. And we help create a virtual cab for efficiency so that it's easy for a change approval board member to review all changes in one place and perform change review actions. And also, we give you a very systemized, repeatable method to triage and identify those changes which require the most review. So that's what release control and change management do together. If you have any other questions or you want more information, please feel free to contact us at the information on this panel. And again, I'm John Stagaman from Advanced Marketplace, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for joining us for the second of 4 CMDB webinar series. Be sure to view the other 3 webinars from this series.